G'day and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to talk to you about a common misconception that I find with hamstring stretching that could be preventing you from making genuine progress with your hamstring flexibility. So basically what we tend to see a lot clinically is that when you're doing a hamstring stretch of any kind, and for example if you have your leg out in front, if you're doing a hamstring stretch and you feel some tightness at the back of your leg, potentially at the back of your knee, what this may actually be is it may actually be sciatic neural tension more so than hamstring tightness. So it goes without saying that if you're spending all of your time under the proviso that you're stretching your hamstrings, but in actual fact you're actually pulling on the sciatic nerve instead, then it's very hard for you to be actually making progress with your hamstring flexibility if that neural tension is getting in the way. So what I'm talking about specifically here is that when you do any hamstring stretch at all, and it doesn't matter how you do it, as long as you feel tension and tightness at the back of the thigh in the muscle belly. Anatomically, there isn't hamstring tissue directly at the back of the knee. The hamstring muscles, as they turn into tendons, sort of bypass the knee on either side to attach into your lower leg. Instead, we're looking at that sciatic nerve. So what I want to do in this video is I want to show you how to attack that neural tension and show you some ways to get rid of that neural tension so that you can actually see whether your hamstrings are actually tight, whether it's just purely neural tension. As we've spoken about in videos before, the overwhelming majority of hamstring dysfunction is actually a symptom of low back dysfunction. So if we want to make sure that we're trying to decrease that sciatic neural tension, whether we want to improve the function of your hamstrings long term, we also need to have a conversation about how your lower back is going, whether it's stiff, whether it's tight, how you position your lower back on a day-to-day basis, how well your core muscles activate and stabilize your spine, to make sure that we normalize the origin of a lot of that hamstring and neural tension so that all of your hard work becomes more permanent. You're not having to keep doing these things forever, which is a cycle that a lot of people tend to be stuck in and have been stuck in for a long time. So the first thing that we want to get to is this neural tension, how to get rid of this neural tension or decrease this neural tension really quickly. So as we like to do on the channel, we want to make sure that we give you a very quick test and a retest that you can do to make sure that you can see change. And a great way to do this is with a straight leg raise. Just lying on your back with your legs out straight. If you keep one leg straight, lifted up as far as you feel comfortable, take note of where your toes go in relation to the roof or the sky, wherever you might be doing this. And then repeat that on the other side to get a sense of where you feel you can get to. For me, this side feels a little bit tighter, and more importantly, I feel this broad sort of tightness going down the back of my leg. Now, with my leg straight, I feel a lot more through the back of my knee. If I bend my knee a little bit, I can go a lot further until I feel a little bit of a stretch in the hamstring. So as I can tell with this exercise and this particular test, is that neural tension stops me here. Once I bend my knee and take some of that tension out, I can go a little bit further and then I feel that hamstring stretch a little bit more. So take note of those details so that you can see exactly what changes and what's left over after you do this. Now, as we go through on the channel a lot, one of the best ways that I've ever found to free up the specific segments of your lower back that have become dysfunctional, potentially become tight, is using a ball. And in this instance, I've got a peanut, which is basically two lacrosse balls taped together. It's ideal to use one if you want to, but you can play around with two. You can use a tennis ball, whatever you feel gives you the best access to be able to find and then decrease that tightness. But you want to use something that has enough density that you feel like it's actually going to do something. Like we always tend to do on the channel, what we want to go looking for, particularly when we're talking about sciatic neural tension down the back of the leg, is when we're really interested in the base of that spine. So we're going to start with the ball either on one side if you have one ball, or the peanut straddling your spine down the middle, right down the base. We're going to get you to lie down on top of the ball and just relax. But what I want you to do is just roll across to one side a little bit just to see which side feels the stiffest. Compare that to the other side. What we want to basically do here is when you find a spot that feels a little bit harder and tighter, potentially tender than the other side, we just want to let the ball specifically press in. So for me today, the side closest to the fence here feels the most tight. Again, that makes sense considering that when I lifted my leg up, this side felt the tightest for me. So what I want to do is I want to find that tightness, stay here for a couple of seconds. You should feel some of the tissue in that area start to give as your nervous system relaxes a little bit. And once you've had enough there, move the ball up a little bit higher, compare sides. Generally, one side's going to stay tighter than the other all the way up. It's not going to shift from one side to the next as you go up all the levels. And then keep spending some time on these areas working through this tissue until you feel like it starts to free up. And then what you'll hopefully find here is that as soon as you've done that, when you do your straight leg raise again, and again, just doing that for a few seconds, I automatically feel like things are a little bit freer on the left-hand side, and then coming up to the right-hand side, it feels a little bit looser again. Now, hopefully on the video that you can see that my leg went a little bit further, because that's how it feels to me. If I bend my knee a little bit more, then I feel like I've got that little bit more tension or that little bit more range to move in before I feel that hamstring become tight as well. Now, again, that's hopefully taking care of the origin of where that neural tension is coming from. But like everything, there's often a sort of more peripheral consequence associated with that central dysfunction. So if you're doing your hamstring stretch, and again, already for me, that feels like some of the tension down the back of my leg has reduced. And I want to urge you, please don't take my word for this, because it's easy for me to fake this to try and make it look better. We want to base it on results. So make sure that when you do that hamstring stretch again after you freed your back up, you deserve to feel like that tissue is now looser. Because once you've done that, we want to then move to a sciatic neural tension or a flossing exercise to try and decrease the specific tension of that nerve that runs through the tissue. Now, it's really important to reinforce with any neural tension exercise is that you can't stretch neural tissue. So one of the reasons why sciatic nerve tension down the back of the thigh can really impact your ability to make change with your hamstring flexibility or perceived lack of hamstring flexibility is because if you're consistently tugging on a tight piece of nerve or neural tissue, it's more akin to steel cabling, where it's not like a piece of elastic that stretches. It doesn't have a lot of give in that system. But what does happen with the body, because we have a finite amount of neural tissue and neural tension in the body, all of that nerve tissue should floss freely through all of the musculoskeletal channels that it passes through. There needs to be a degree of flossing that happens with that tissue in order to allow you to move through the ranges that we have. So if we can get you to lie down on your back again, we're going to do a neural tension or a nerve flossing exercise. If you can grab behind your thigh, and we'll do this one again because this one is the tightest. You want to make sure you stay nice and comfortably relaxed. You want to bend your foot back just to tension up the nerve to begin with. Then all I want you to do is very gently straighten your leg as far as you feel comfortable. And what you'll hopefully find is when you get towards the end of this position, you'll hopefully feel some of that tension down the back of your leg. And again, what I'd like you to do here, because we'll do about 10 or 15 of these, is depending on where you get to again and keeping your thigh relatively still, hopefully after about 10 or 15 of these, you'll start to feel like your foot actually goes further and further and further than it did to begin with, so that you can see that you're making genuine change in the moment while you're doing this. And then again, once you've done 10 or 15 of those, if we come back to your straight leg raise again, you should feel again that it goes back further than what it did before. And again, for me, it's probably hard for you to trust me on this, but it feels like not only does this go further, but it feels like there's less broad tension in my leg as there was before. When I bend my knee a little bit, again, I feel a little bit more hamstring tension at the middle of the thigh here, as opposed to that broad tension down the back of the leg. So those two things are really important to make sure that when we're freeing up the origin of that neural tension, but then also flossing that nerve tissue free through any of the adhesions or restrictions or whatever might be limiting that nerve sort of flossing and gliding sufficiently through the back of your leg. So the next thing that we want to touch on here is once you've been able to clear free some of that neural tension from the origin and the peripheral as it goes to the back of the leg, we also want to show you probably the best way to mobilize a tight hamstring. And again, you can choose any position or stretch that you find most convenient and most comfortable for you, so long as you find some tension in the back of the thigh, not at the back of the knee while you do it. So I'm going to go for the traditional sit and reach one, but what's really important here is we don't want to keep your knee straight. So the straighter your knee is, the more likely you are to run into some of that neural tension when you do the stretch. So what I always recommend is bend your knee a little bit first. What we want to make sure that we do here is we don't want to do this from your lower back. We want to try and do it from your hip as much as possible to really tension up that thigh the most. So what I would recommend is when you do this, is if you sit up nice and tall, or if you're standing with your foot up on something, lean forward from your hip first as far as you feel comfortable until you find some of that tension in the thigh. And for me, for example, I can get to here where I feel some really good tension behind my thigh here. If I just bend my back now, I can get all the way down, but that tension hasn't changed because I've tensioned up enough through my hip. Now it's just 100% low back from that point, so it doesn't add anything to the stretch. So Don't judge how effective you are or how mobile you are by how far you can go, because there's a lot of joints involved in that movement. Go up nice and tall and try and close down that hip as much as you can until you find that tightness, and then stay there. So you may not go as far as what you're used to going, but that's not the point, as long as you can feel that tension in the back of that thigh. Then what I want you to do here is, once you've found that tension, again, as we always try and promote on the channel, just holding a muscle stretch isn't good enough anymore. It doesn't get the immediate results that we need to get or deserve to get from our stretching and our time spent stretching, particularly if you're really busy. But what I want you to do instead is, once you've found that tightness, we need to engage that tightness. We need to tense up that tightness and make that work. And this proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, or PNF style stretching, is easily the best way to stretch, because by tensing up that tightness, we get our brain and nervous system involved. If we hold that for about 5 to 10 seconds, make that tissue work, push your heel back into the ground, try and bend your knee, whatever that might be. Once you relax that after about 5 to 10 seconds, and your brain and nervous system has a chance to reflexively relax that muscle, you should then feel like you can go a fraction further into the stretch than you could before. Do this and keep repeating that process as far as you can before you stop making change. And then what you'll hopefully find is, when you come back to something like a general sort of hamstring stretch or a straight leg raise, it should automatically feel looser and freer than what it was before. So once you've deciphered whether your hamstring tightness is actually a tight hamstring or increased neural tension, we also need to talk about one really important concept, which is why that back has become dysfunctional in the first place. Depending on where you found the most interesting part of your back was in terms of the stiffness and the tightness, there has to be a reason why that specific section has become stiff and tight. And personally, when we're talking about these things clinically with patients, the overwhelming majority of people can relate their specific spinal dysfunction back to the shapes and positions they put their body in the most throughout the day. So we're talking about sitting on the couch watching TV, sitting at a desk, sitting at a computer, driving a car, sitting up in bed reading a book, playing an instrument, doing arts and crafts, whatever it might be. Often we can relate these shapes back to the postures and the positions you put that part of your back into. So it goes without saying that if you're working really hard to free up your hamstrings or your sciatic nerve, and free up those segments of your back that become stiff and tight, if we're then not having a conversation about where and how you might be losing your posture throughout the day, again, depending on what you might find yourself doing, if we can't bring you back out of that position to a more upright shape more consistently, then again, we can't remove you from that constant cycle of having to stretch your hamstrings or having to release a tight low back, having to consistently floss free that tight neural tension, if we're not talking about your postural habits and your awareness of your postural habits. So what I would urge anyone to do is, if you're trying to break that cycle of consistently needing to free up the back of your leg, take a step back and consider the moments as you are stuck in a particular sitting shape, most likely, how long you're there for. If you can do little things like roll up a towel and jam it into your back, or take frequent breaks where you're standing up and breaking those habits, then we can start to have a conversation surrounding why those parts of your back have become dysfunctional in the first place, and then consistently asking you to free up the back of your leg, whether it be for sport or activity. So I genuinely hope that was helpful once again. Hopefully it was really interesting to figure out whether your hamstring tightness is actually because of a tight hamstring or just because of neural tension going down the back of your leg. If it was, please consider leaving a like rating on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new and you want more of this type of information. And if you ultimately found this really helpful, please consider leaving a super thanks donation on the video. It's just a great way to help support me in the channel and allow me to keep making these videos. But with that being said, as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.